significant transatlantic rift is brewing, and this time, the issue is not trade or defense, but a social media platform. On Friday, U.S. Senator Mike Lee ignited a political firestorm with a chilling post on X, warning that Washington could withdraw from NATO if the European Commission moves ahead with penalties against the Elon Musk-owned platform. This clash over a tech company is more than a trivial disagreement. It reflects a larger, more troubling trend in global governance. The EU's decision to target X with potentially devastating financial penalties goes beyond regulating disinformation or digital content. It signals the weaponization of law for political leverage. The European Commission is using its regulatory power to coerce a private company into compliance, risking a geopolitical crisis that could threaten NATO's future and the foundation of international diplomacy. Senator Lee's explosive post is not merely a threat, but a dire warning that the EU's actions could trigger a major shift in the transatlantic alliance. The idea that NATO could fracture over a social media platform, of all things, highlights the absurdity of modern geopolitics. This isn't just about international relations. It's the corporate world colliding with state sovereignty. By targeting X, the EU is attempting to regulate not just the digital space, but the political and economic policies of the United States. This overreach is a direct challenge to national sovereignty and the ability of nations to engage in diplomacy free from the influence of unelected bureaucrats. If the EU does this, we leave NATO, Lee wrote, sending shockwaves through European capitals and raising the prospect of a political rupture between long-standing allies. This development marks a monumental escalation in transatlantic relations. The stakes are immense, and the European Commission's pursuit of a fine against X could push NATO into uncharted waters. Lee's warning resonates with growing frustration in Washington over the EU's relentless pursuit of regulatory control, often at the expense of American interests. The possibility that the United States might withdraw from NATO over a tech platform is no small matter. This is a political earthquake in the making. Let's be clear, the EU is playing a dangerous game. Brussels seems to have forgotten that NATO is a mutual defense pact, not a tool for ideological and economic coercion. By targeting X, a key player in the global tech industry, the EU is ignoring the broader geopolitical implications. This isn't merely about regulating digital content. It's about shifting the balance of power between Europe and the United States. The EU is signaling its readiness to challenge American tech dominance. But these heavy-handed tactics risk alienating the United States and destabilizing the very alliance that has been the foundation of Western security for decades. The threat follows a Wall Street Journal report revealing that EU regulators are preparing a major fine against X for violating the Digital Services Act, a sweeping law aimed at curbing disinformation and harmful content online. At the heart of this issue is the Digital Services Act. On the surface, the DSA's goals, combating disinformation and harmful online content, seem reasonable. However, the implementation of such sweeping laws is fraught with dangers. The DSA represents another attempt by European bureaucrats to impose a one-size-fits-all approach to the digital world. It is a blunt instrument, not a scalpel, and in wielding it, the European Commission risks significant overreach and unintended consequences. Rather than encouraging collaboration between governments and private companies, the DSA fosters an environment of fear and confrontation. Fining X over content moderation practices under this law could set a dangerous precedent, potentially discouraging innovation or pushing companies to leave Europe. The European Commission is positioning itself as the global enforcer of digital policy, a role that should raise concerns about freedom of expression and the autonomy of tech giants. This isn't just about digital governance. It's about controlling the flow of information, dictating what can be said, and restricting access to alternative viewpoints. But beyond the digital space, this is a deeper struggle for power. The European Commission is using disinformation as a pretext to impose political and economic pressure on the United States. This is no longer simply a regulatory issue. It's a geopolitical weapon, and it could ignite a wider conflict between global superpowers. It's naive to think that this fine and the broader regulatory framework won't have far-reaching consequences, not just for NATO, but for global trade, diplomacy, and security. Sources cited by the Wall Street Journal suggest the penalties could include both a hefty fine and enforced product changes, with an announcement expected as early as this summer. One source indicated the fine could exceed $1 billion, an unprecedented move intended to deter other tech giants from violating the law across the 27-nation bloc. A billion-dollar fine is nothing short of economic warfare. The EU is positioning itself as the global enforcer of digital policy, using punitive measures that could cripple American tech giants if they don't comply. This isn't a mere slap on the wrist. This is an attempt to reshape the global business landscape to serve European interests. The message is clear: comply with our rules or face massive penalties. But the consequences of such actions may be far more severe than the EU anticipates. By exerting this kind of pressure, Europe risks alienating the very companies driving global innovation. The EU's regulatory strategy is short-sighted and self-destructive. Instead of collaborating with tech companies to develop better, more effective regulations, Europe is choosing confrontation. In the process, it undermines its own technological competitiveness, while strengthening the hand of authoritarian regimes like China, which are eager to exploit instability in the West. The long-term damage to Europe's position in the global economy could be disastrous. What's more, this move against X could backfire. Instead of deterring other tech giants from breaching the law, it could push them to abandon the European market altogether. The message to American companies is clear: Europe is no longer a place where they can operate freely. If the EU persists with these punitive measures, US-based companies will likely seek more favorable regulatory environments in Asia or elsewhere. In the end, the EU would have weakened its own digital economy while driving tech companies to other markets. The European Commission began investigating X in 2023 and issued a preliminary ruling last year, finding the platform in violation of the DSA's requirements. This investigation into X is another example of the EU overstepping its bounds. While the DSA's goals may seem noble, its implementation opens the door for political agendas to influence regulatory frameworks. The investigation raises questions about the EU's true motivations. It has dragged on for years, with a ruling now pending, suggesting that the EU may be using X as a pawn in a broader geopolitical struggle. The investigation isn't about digital safety. It's about asserting control over one of the world's most influential platforms, regulating political speech, censoring dissent, and establishing a monopoly on acceptable discourse. This should serve as a wake-up call for anyone who believes the EU is acting in good faith. The European Commission's actions are deeply political, and they could have far-reaching consequences for free speech, privacy, and digital innovation. The United States, along with other nations, must push back against these authoritarian tactics before it's too late. The standoff deepens with a second, broader EU probe into X's content moderation policies. Now, a second investigation has emerged, this time focusing on X's content moderation practices. This is yet another illustration of the EU's obsession with controlling information. The issue at hand is not about cleaning up the internet. It's about silencing voices that don't conform to the EU's narrow ideological framework. Europe is attempting to dictate the content moderation policies of a private company, forcing it to align with politically sensitive issues. This is a dangerous precedent that threatens the very essence of free speech and democratic governance. X, like all tech platforms, must strike a balance between moderating harmful content and allowing free expression. But the European Commission's insistence on micromanaging this process is dangerous. It represents the EU's attempt to impose its political views on the entire digital world. In doing so, it risks not only the future of social media, but the future of democracy itself. Although EU regulators have indicated that a settlement remains possible if X complies with demand for policy changes, Senator Lee's ultimatum signals that Washington's response could escalate tensions far beyond the digital domain. The standoff between the United States and the European Union over X is a microcosm of a broader battle between democracy and authoritarianism, between national sovereignty and supranational control. If the EU continues down this path, it risks undermining the very principles it claims to uphold. The United States must make it clear that it will not tolerate such blatant overreach. The battle over X is just the beginning. The future of global governance is at stake, and if we fail to push back against these encroachments, we could witness democracy itself hollowed out from within. The message is clear: act now or lose everything.